Forget what you've seen in movies. Forget the paintings of languid, graceful women lounging on silk, whispering philosophy into the ears of handsome, bearded statesmen. Erase the image of the empowered courtesan, the intellectual muse who shaped the course of Western thought from a tastefully decorated boudoir. That's a lie. It's a pretty, perfumed, convenient lie we tell ourselves, because the truth is so much uglier, so much stickier. The truth smells of stale wine, sweat, and desperation. The truth is a transaction, paid in chipped bronze coins and measured in silent humiliations. Tonight, we're not visiting a museum. We're crawling into the back alleys of classical Athens, into the cramped, smoky rooms where history was made, not with grand speeches, but with gritted teeth and a feigned moan. Imagine you're a hetaira, one of the famed companion courtesans of ancient Greece. You're not a citizen, you're not a wife, protected and hidden away in the gynoecium. You are, in the bluntest terms, a high-class piece of meat. Your mind is a delightful party trick, your body is the main course, and your future is entirely dependent on the whims of powerful, often brutal men who view you as a status symbol, a release valve, and, ultimately, a disposable good. Sound romantic? It wasn't. It was a tightrope walk over a sewer, performed daily, with the only safety net being your ability to charm, to please, and to swallow your own disgust until it became as familiar as the taste of cheap wine. The grand idea of the hetaira was that she provided what a respectable Athenian wife could not: sparkling conversation, artistic talent, and sexual companionship without the dreary obligations of lineage and household management. She was the fantasy, the escape. The reality was that she was a product, meticulously crafted and maintained, whose value depreciated with every passing day. The line between a celebrated hetaira like Aspasia, and trust me, she was the one-in-a-million exception who still faced public slut-shaming and prosecution, and the common pawn grinding out a miserable existence in a dockside brothel was terrifyingly thin. It was a line crossed through one bad patron, one unwanted pregnancy, one wrinkle that couldn't be hidden by the thick, poisonous makeup. So, settle in. We're about to spend a night in her sandals. We're going to feel the grit on the floor, smell the smoke from the oil lamps, and learn the bitter arithmetic of survival in a world that celebrated your beauty while denying your humanity. This isn't a story of glamour, it's a story of labor. The labor of the body, the labor of the emotions, and the soul-crushing labor of pretending it's all a beautiful, sophisticated game. Hold up. Before we dive into this unholy mess, I need a confession from my little congregation of historical deviants. Where are you sinning from, and what ungodly hour is it on your clock? And let me know in the comments. I want to know who's joining me on this express train to the underworld tonight. I want to picture you safe and sound in your modern world before we drag you back to the filth and the fury. Okay, say a prayer to whatever god you fancy. It won't help. The day for our hetaira, let's call her Lyra, a name that sounds prettier than her reality feels, doesn't begin with a gentle awakening to the Grecian sun. It begins with a jolt of anxiety in a small, probably windowless, rented room. The first thought isn't of poetry or philosophy. It's a cold, hard calculation. Do I have a booking for tonight's symposium? Is it with a generous patron, or is it with Philippos, the one with the sour breath and the wandering, pinching hands who always argues the price down? This anxiety is the engine of her existence, the foul fuel that gets her out of her lumpy, straw-stuffed bed. The air in her room is thick with the ghosts of last night, the lingering scent of spilt wine, cheap perfume, and the faint, coppery smell of blood from the raw patch on her knee where it scraped against the rough floor tiles. The preparation for the evening is not a pampering ritual. It is a battle. It is an act of construction, of spackling over the cracks of reality with a paste of pain and illusion. The first order of business is the body, her only real asset. And the most prized quality after youth is smoothness. Not a stray hair can be allowed to exist below the neck. This isn't a quick shave in the shower, this is an ordeal. She might have a pair of bronze tweezers, sharp and unforgiving, and a slave girl, if she's successful enough to afford one, to spend an hour or more plucking hair by agonizing hair. Imagine the tiny, sharp bites, the ensuing red bumps, the low-grade, constant pain. A more common and far more dangerous method is the depilatory paste. This isn't your fragrant modern hair removal cream. This is a foul-smelling concoction of arsenic sulfide and quicklime mixed into a sludge. She'd smear this caustic filth over her legs, her arms, under her arms, and most intimately between her legs. She'd have to wait for it to work, feeling the chemical heat build, the burning sensation that promised smoothness but threatened a chemical burn. The line between hairless and raw was a fine one, and she crossed it often. The paste would be scraped off, taking the hair with it, leaving behind skin that was tender, inflamed, and screaming for relief it would not get. The smell alone, a mix of sulfur and rot, would cling to her for hours, a secret little reminder of the ugliness beneath the artifice. Then comes the bath. This isn't a luxurious marble tub. It's a clay basin of cold water, hauled by a slave or by Lyra herself. She scrubs her skin with a block of harsh, lye-based soap and olive oil, trying to remove the grime of the city and the memory of last night's client. She uses a strigil, a curved metal scraper, to peel off the excess oil, dirt, and dead skin. It's a functional brutalist kind of clean. It leaves the skin red and chafed, but it's the best she can do. The real horror show begins with her face. The ideal of beauty is a ghostly, almost deathly pallor. To achieve this, she uses a makeup called simithion, or white lead ceruse. It's a thick, white paste made from lead shavings steeped in vinegar. Every day, she knowingly smears a potent neurotoxin all over her face, neck, and chest. She feels it drying, tightening her skin into an expressionless mask, leaching into her pores. She knows, on some level, that it's poison. The older hetairai she sees in the market, the ones who can no longer get work, have the telltale signs: blackened gums, rotting teeth, tremors, a creeping paralysis. But vanity and necessity are a powerful cocktail. To be desirable is to be pale. To be undesirable is to starve. So she applies the lead. She paints on her own slow death one day at a time. On top of this poisonous canvas, she adds colour. Crushed mulberries or alkanet root for a flush on the cheeks and a stain on the lips. The colour must be just so, a hint of life in the porcelain mask, not the healthy, ruddy glow of a peasant girl who works in the sun. The eyes are the final touch. She uses coal, a black powder made from soot, antimony or ash mixed with oil. She applies it with a delicate bronze or ivory stick, rimming her eyes to make them look larger, more dramatic, more soulful. It's an illusion of depth, painted over a well of exhaustion. The final step is the hair. Intricate braids, curls held in place with beeswax and scented oils, piled high on her head and adorned with ribbons or pins. It's heavy, it's hot, it pulls at her scalp, but it looks impressive, it looks like wealth, it looks like art. And that's the whole point. She is a living sculpture. By the time the preparation is done, hours have passed. Lyra's body is a tapestry of minor agonies. Her skin burns from the depilatory, her scalp aches from the weight of her hair, and a low-grade headache is beginning behind her eyes from the fumes of the lead paint on her face. She looks in her polished bronze mirror, not a clear reflection, but a murky, distorted version of herself. She doesn't see beauty. She sees a product ready for market. She practices her smile, the one that reaches her lips but never her eyes. She rehearses a witty line she overheard. Something about Socrates and the nature of virtue. It's a bitter irony that tastes like lead and arsenic. The justification for all this pain is simple survival. This is what it takes to earn the drachmas that pay for her room, her food, her slave, her poisonous makeup. It's a closed loop of misery. She poisons herself to look beautiful, to earn money from a man who will paw at her constructed perfection, so she can afford to buy more poison for tomorrow. What a glorious life. The pre-ritual isn't just physical, it's a psychological bracing. It's the process of packing her true self away into a small, dark box in the back of her mind. The Lyra who feels fear, disgust, and weariness cannot be present at the symposium. The woman who shows up must be a performance, witty, charming, endlessly accommodating, and above all, unbothered. She is selling a fantasy, and the first person she has to sell it to is herself. The price is a piece of her soul, paid in daily installments. Let's talk about where this sordid little drama plays out. Forget grand Athenian villas bathed in golden light. The physical environment of our hetaira's life is a character in itself, and it's usually a grubby, claustrophobic one. The setting reinforces the power dynamics at every turn, a constant, tangible reminder of her place in the social food chain. If Lyra is at the top of her game, she might be summoned to the andron, the men's quarters, of a wealthy patron's oikos, his household. This is the best-case scenario, and it's still deeply unsettling. The room is designed for one purpose, male leisure. The architecture itself is a statement of exclusion. It's set apart from the gymnasium, the women's quarters, where the respectable wife and daughters are cloistered. Lyra enters a space that is fundamentally not for her, or any woman, to inhabit with agency. The room is dominated by 7 to 9 clini, the dining couches, arranged against the walls. These aren't soft, upholstered sofas. They are hard, wooden or bronze frames, perhaps with some thin, lumpy, wool-stuffed cushions on top. This is where the men will recline, two to a couch, to eat, drink, talk, and eventually to use her. The floor is often mosaic, beautiful but cold and hard. It's designed to be easily washed down, a practical consideration, given that the evening's entertainment often involves vomiting and a game called courtesans, where men would fling the dregs from their wine cups at a target. The air is the first thing that hits you. It's a suffocating cocktail of smells. The sharp, smoky perfume of burning olive oil from the sputtering lamps that cast long, dancing shadows, making everything look distorted and monstrous. The cloying sweetness of cheap incense, struggling and failing to mask the other odors. There's the rich smell of roasted meat, garlic, and herbs from the food being served. Underneath that is the pervasive vinegary tang of watered-down wine, which will soon be sloshing on the floor. And then there are the human smells, the sweat of too many bodies packed into a poorly ventilated room, the rancid oil on the men's skin, the sour whiff of unwashed tunics. This sensory assault is the wallpaper of her working life. Now let's consider the less glamorous alternative. If Lyra isn't booked for a private party, she might work out of her own rented room, or one owned by a pornoboscos, a pimp. This is a far cry from the mosaic floors of the elite. This is a small, cramped space, perhaps in a tenement building or an upper floor above a shop. The walls are cracked plaster, the floor is packed earth or rough wood. The only furniture is a low bed, a simple straw mattress on a wooden frame that creaks with every movement. The tools of the trade are laid out on a small wooden table. This is where the bleakness really sinks in. There's her pot of white lead poison, the coal, the bottle of cheap, musky perfume. But there are other grimmer items, a bowl of vinegar and a sea sponge, her crude and unreliable method of contraception. A small flask of wine, not for pleasure, but to dull her own senses enough to get through the night. A bronze razor, not for her own grooming, but for a client who might demand a shave. The tools aren't just for beautification, they are for managing the raw biological realities of the job. They speak of risk, of biology, of a desperate attempt to exert some control over a body that is fundamentally not her own. The lighting in this room is even worse. A single, flickering lamp that makes the small space feel like a cave. The shadows don't just dance, they cling to the corners, hiding dirt and despair. The sounds are different here too. Instead of the boisterous laughter of a symposium, there's the muted noise of the street outside, shouting, the rumble of carts, the barking of dogs, and inside the sounds are intimate and awful. The creak of the bed, the sound of labored breathing, the soft, transactional clink of coins placed on the table before the client leaves. Each environment, the high-class andron or the low-class rented room, tells the same story through different materials. The luxury of the patron's home is a constant reminder of the chasm between his world and hers. He reclines on his fine couch, she performs on the hard floor. He owns the space, she is a temporary, rented fixture within it. The filth of her own room is a direct reflection of her social standing. It's a physical manifestation of her shame, her poverty, her disposability. The environment is not a passive backdrop, it's an active participant in her humiliation. The cold floor, the smoky air, the creaking bed, they are all co-conspirators in the nightly drama of her exploitation. The tools are not instruments of art, but of survival. The lead makeup is a shield. The vinegar-soaked sponge is a prayer against a catastrophic future. The cheap wine is a merciful anesthetic. In this world, even the objects are imbued with a quiet desperation, silent witnesses to the cost of living a life that is, in essence, a performance for the pleasure of others. The symbolic meaning is impossible to escape. The whole setup, from the architecture to the tools, is designed to reinforce one brutal fact. She is there to be consumed. Like the wine and the food, she is a provision for the evening's entertainment, and just as disposable. In this theatre of exploitation, you need a director. You need an authority figure, someone who holds the script, pulls the strings, and reaps the profits. This isn't a simple two-person drama between a man and a woman. It's a complex power play orchestrated by a whole system of control, embodied by the patron, the pimp, and the very laws of the polis. Let's start with the best of them, the wealthy patron. He's your client, your Erastes lover, a term we'll use with the heaviest of air quotes. He might be a respected general, a glib politician, or a somber philosopher. In the daylight of the agora, he discusses virtue, justice, and the good of the state. He is a citizen, a husband, a father. He is a pillar of the community. At night, in the smoky confines of his andron, he is something else entirely. He is a consumer of forbidden pleasures, and Lyra is his favorite product. The hypocrisy is staggering, and it's the very foundation of their relationship. He needs her precisely because she is everything his respectable citizen wife is not: educated to a point, witty, sexually available, and, most importantly, outside the rigid social structure of family and inheritance. He can discuss Plato with her, and then he can bend her over the dining couch. This duality is not a contradiction to him, it's the natural order of things. His power over her is absolute and multifaceted. First, there's the economic power. He pays her. Or, more accurately, he might pay her. Payment could be delayed, disputed, or simply forgotten in a drunken stupor. She has no recourse. She can't sue him. She can't report him. She is a non-person in the eyes of the law. Her survival depends on his generosity, which is a flimsy thing to build a life on. He can drop her at any moment for a younger, newer model, and she would be left with nothing. Second, there's the social power. He is a citizen. She is at best a resident alien, metic, or at worst, a slave. His word can ruin her. A public accusation, a whisper of theft or impiety could see her expelled from the city or sold into a brothel. She exists at his sufferance. Her freedom is a leash held loosely in his hand. There's the physical power. While outright brutal violence might be considered uncouth in his circle, the threat is always there. He is stronger, he is drunk, his friends are drunk, the room is private. If things get out of hand, if she refuses a particular demand, who will stop him? Who will even care? The detached way he wields this power is perhaps the most chilling part. He doesn't need to be a monster. He just needs to be a man of his time, utterly convinced of his own entitlement. He might even believe he is being kind to her, that he is patronizing the arts by supporting her. He sees her as a charming pet, a delightful diversion. He doesn't see the terror in her eyes when his friends get too rough. He doesn't register the way she flinches when he raises his voice. He is the center of his own universe, and she is merely a satellite existing to reflect his light. Now let's slide down the ladder of authority to a much grimier figure, the pornoboskos, the pimp or brothel keeper. This man is not pretending to be a pillar of the community. He is a businessman, and his business is flesh. If Lyra is not a freelancer, she belongs to him. She may have been born a slave or sold into the trade to pay a debt. The pornoboskos is her owner. The dynamic here is stripped of all pretense and intellectual veneer. It is pure, brutal commerce. He takes the vast majority of her earnings, giving her just enough for a meager existence. He dictates which clients she sees, what she wears, and what acts she must perform. Refusal is not an option. The consequences are swift and violent. A beating, starvation, or being sold to an even worse master, perhaps to work in the silver mines where she would be dead in a year. The pornoboskos is the physical manifestation of the system. He is the middleman who profits from the hypocrisy of the elite. The same politician who decries moral decay in the assembly might be his best customer. The pimp is a necessary, if reviled, part of the city's machinery, managing the messy biological urges of its powerful men. He is the ultimate authority figure in Lyra's life, a constant, terrifying presence. His hypocrisy is of a different sort. He doesn't preach virtue, he preaches pragmatism. This is just how the world works, he might say, while counting the coins she earned with her body. He is the voice of cynical resignation, the embodiment of a world where everything and everyone has a price. The final authority figure is the most abstract and the most powerful, the social code of Athens itself, the law and customs that divide the world into neat, brutal categories, citizen and non-citizen, man and woman, wife and whore. This code, written and enforced by the men at the top, is what makes her exploitation not just possible, but logical. It creates the demand for her services by sequestering respectable women, and it ensures she can never escape her station by denying her legal rights and personhood. She is trapped in a cage whose bars are made of laws, customs, and the collected hypocrisy of an entire society. So, who is in charge? They all are. The patron, with his casual cruelty and intellectual justifications. The pimp, with his fists and his ledger book, and the silent, unassailable code of the polis that says, "This is your place. This is your function. Do not dare to ask for more." This is the government she lives under, a tyranny of lust, power, and rank. Before the first drop of wine is poured at the symposium, before the first forced smile is offered, a different kind of ritual is taking place inside Lyra's mind. To survive the night, she must retreat into an internal world fortified by a strange and desperate mix of superstition, cynical faith, and psychological justification. This is her last line of defense, the only space that is truly her own, and it is a crowded, chaotic landscape. Let's start with religion. The gods of Olympus are not distant, benevolent figures for her. They are active, capricious, and frankly, terrible role models. Zeus, the king of the gods, is a serial rapist and philanderer. Aphrodite, the goddess of love and beauty, is vain, vengeful, and born from sea foam and the severed genitals of her father. The gods are a divine permission slip for the worst of human behavior. When a powerful patron forces himself upon her, is he not just emulating the father of gods and men? This divine soap opera provides a perverse kind of comfort. It normalizes the chaos. The world is run by lustful, petty, and violent deities, so why should the world of men be any different? Lyra might offer a small prayer to Aphrodite, not for love, but for a successful transaction. She might pray for the goddess to make her desirable, to soften a difficult client's heart, or to make the night pass quickly. It's not a prayer for salvation, it's a prayer for good business. She might also make small offerings to darker, more chthonic deities, gods of the underworld or the crossroads, hoping to ward off evil. This is the religion of the desperate, a cosmic bargaining with forces that are, at best, indifferent to her suffering. Then there's the thick, murky soup of folk medicine and superstition. The ancient Greek understanding of the human body was, to put it mildly, a hot mess. It was all based on the theory of the four humours: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Health was a matter of keeping these fluids in balance. Women, they believed, were inherently wet and cold creatures, leaky, irrational, and fundamentally inferior to the hot and dry male form. A woman's womb was thought to be a free-floating animal within her body, capable of wandering around and causing hysteria if it wasn't regularly watered by male seed. This wasn't just abstract medical theory, it was a core belief that framed every aspect of her life and work. It justified her subjugation. Of course she was ruled by her body. Her body was a chaotic, mobile creature unto itself. This led to a terrifying array of folk remedies and superstitions surrounding her trade. The most pressing fear was, of course, pregnancy. A child born to a hetaira was a disaster. It would be a non-citizen, an outcast, a drain on her meager resources, and a stark 9-month-long advertisement that she was unavailable for work. The contraceptive methods were a witch's brew of hope and nonsense. She might be told to eat a certain herb, to hold her breath at the moment of climax, or, most bizarrely, to sneeze and jump backwards 7 times immediately after sex to dislodge the seed. She might insert a wad of wool soaked in honey or olive oil as a primitive barrier. Or she might rely on the vinegar-soaked sponge, the most common and perhaps marginally effective method. Every month, the wait for her menstrual blood was a period of cold, silent terror. If it didn't come, she faced a grim choice: a dangerous back-alley abortion induced by violent purgatives or physical trauma, or a child who would inherit her status at the very bottom of society. Disease was another constant spectre. They didn't have a concept of germ theory, but they knew that sickness was spread through contact. They believed in miasma, a kind of poisonous air or pollution that could cling to people and places. Sex was a potent source of miasma. To protect herself, she might wear an amulet, a small pouch of herbs, or a carved phallus to ward off the evil eye and sickness. She might perform ritual cleansings, not just for hygiene, but to spiritually purify herself from the taint of her work. These beliefs, as strange as they sound to us, were her reality. They were her operating system. They provided a framework, however flawed, for understanding the dangers she faced. The superstition was a form of control in a life where she had none. If she performed the right ritual, wore the right amulet, maybe, just maybe, she could keep the worst at bay. Finally, we have the psychological justifications, the story she tells herself to get through the day. This is where the real mental gymnastics begin. She has to rationalize her own commodification. This is just a job, she tells herself, a mantra repeated until it almost feels true. My body is here, but my mind is somewhere else. she learns to dissociate, to become a spectator of her own life. She might focus on a crack in the ceiling, on the rhythm of the music being played, on anything other than the weight of the man on top of her. She might develop a cynical pride in her skills. She is better at this than other women. She can fake pleasure more convincingly. She can banter more wittily. She can extract a higher price. This professionalism is a shield, a way of turning a trauma into a craft. And then there's the internal monologue, the silent, sarcastic commentary running in her head. As a patron drones on about his own importance, she's dissecting his vanity, his insecurities, his foolishness. Look at this pompous old goat, she might think. He actually believes his own speeches. This secret contempt is a small, vital act of resistance. It preserves a tiny corner of her mind that is still free, still hers. It's the only place she can be honest. This internal world is her sanctuary and her prison. It's a testament to the human mind's incredible ability to adapt, to find meaning and create order in the midst of chaos and degradation. It's a messy, contradictory, and deeply human place filled with gods, demons, medical nonsense, and a core of resilient, bitter humor. It is the only thing that separates her from being a pure object, a doll to be played with and discarded. It's the engine of her survival. The sun has set over Athens. The torches are lit. Lyra, a walking masterpiece of poison and pain, makes her way through the darkening, refuse-strewn streets to the home of her patron for the evening. The real performance is about to begin. The arrival at the symposium is the first shock, a plunge into a pool of aggressive male energy. All the mental preparation, all the practiced detachment is immediately tested. She doesn't enter a serene gathering of intellects. She enters a wall of noise. The sound hits her first. It's a cacophony of boisterous, drunken laughter, of men shouting over each other, of the high, reedy skirl of the aulos. A double pipe instrument played by another hired girl, its sound intentionally jarring and stimulating. It's the sound of men with power letting their hair down, and it's a dangerous sound. She pauses at the doorway to the andron, the men's quarters, taking a moment to survey the scene. The room, already smoky and close, is filled with reclining figures. The patrons, draped in their finest tunics, are already 2 or 3 cups of wine into the evening. Their faces are flushed, their eyes overly bright. They lie on their waclini, leaning on their left elbows, leaving their right hands free for eating, drinking, and, as she knows all too well, for grabbing. Her entrance is noted. The conversation might dip for a second, and all eyes turn to her. This is the moment of judgment. She is being appraised like a prize horse. They take in her hair, her pale face, her dress. A murmur of approval or a lewd comment shouted across the room confirms she has passed the initial inspection. Her patron for the evening, a fleshy-faced merchant named Demetrios, beckons her over with a greasy hand. "Lyra, you've arrived. Come, recline here." The space he indicates is not a couch of her own. It's the spot at the foot of his klein. She is expected to perch there, or sometimes even sit on the floor, an accessory to his comfort. This is the first point of physical contact. As she arranges herself, Demetrios's hand immediately finds her back, then slides down to her waist. It's not a caress. It's a statement of ownership. "This one is mine tonight," the gesture says to the other men in the room. He thrusts a kylix, a shallow, wide-brimmed drinking cup, into her hand. "Drink. The wine is excellent tonight." The wine is not excellent. It's the standard Greek fare, strong, thick, and mixed with water in a large crater at the center of the room. But she has to drink. Refusal would be an insult. To participate in the symposium is to drink with the men. She knows she must pace herself, to nurse this one cup for as long as possible, but the pressure is immense. "Don't be shy," another man bellows from a nearby couch. Her job isn't just to be beautiful, it's to be fun. And fun, in this context, means drunk enough to be compliant, but not so drunk as to be sloppy. It's another tightrope walk. The initial shock is not just the noise and the groping, it's the immediate, overwhelming pressure to perform. Before she can even settle, she is expected to be on. Demetrios wants to show her off. Lyra, recite for us that poem by Sappho, the one about the apple. He's not asking because he has a deep appreciation for poetry. He's asking because her performance reflects well on him. It shows he has procured a hetaira of class and education. So she recites. Her voice, clear and practiced, cuts through the din for a moment. She summons the words of a woman writing about love and desire centuries ago and turns them into a party trick for a room full of men who see desire as a form of conquest. The irony is a stone in her gut. As she speaks the beautiful, fragile words, a man on the next couch, a friend of Demetrios, reaches over and squeezes her thigh hard. He grins at her, his teeth stained with red wine. She doesn't flinch, she doesn't stop reciting. Her training takes over. Her face remains a serene mask, her voice steady. But inside, a cold rage is coiling. This is the first point of contact, the moment all her illusions of control and professionalism shatter against the hard reality of the room. She is not a respected artist. She is not a witty conversationalist. She is a toy passed around for the amusement of her owners. The clumsy, unsolicited touch is a blunt reminder of her function here. It bypasses all the sophisticated trappings, the poetry, the music, the philosophical pretense, and gets right to the point. You are here for our hands. You are here for our pleasure. Every nerve in her body screams, but her face is a placid lake. The shock is in the seamless transition from intellectual companion to communal property. It happens in a heartbeat. The poem ends. There is some scattered, drunken applause. Demetrios pats her proudly, as if she were a clever dog who has just performed a trick. He refills her cup. The aulos player starts a more raucous tune. The volume in the room rises again. The brief moment of artistry is over. Now the real business of the evening can begin. The initial shock isn't a single event. It's a series of small, sharp aggressions that dismantle her defenses and establish the brutal rules of the game. It's the grab, the forced drink, the command performance. It's the chilling realization that her carefully constructed persona is a fragile shell that these men can and will crack open whenever they please. The night is young, and it's already promising to be a long one. The poetry is over. The politish part of the evening has bled out, staining the mosaic floor along with the first few sloshes of wine. Now begins the midpoint slog, the grinding, chaotic heart of the symposium. This isn't a single climactic event. It's a long, messy, and grotesquely intimate ordeal, a descent into a kind of organized debauchery where Lyra is both participant and centerpiece. The atmosphere thickens, becoming more primal. The men are drunker now, their laughter louder and harsher, their movements less coordinated. The careful separation of the clean-eye breaks down as men stumble from one couch to another, grabbing more food, more wine, or grabbing at the flute girl or at Lyra. The air is now heavy with the smell of spilt wine turning sour, hot bodies, and the first hints of vomit from the youngest guest in the corner who couldn't handle his drink. The main entertainment of the mid-symposium often involves games. The most popular is courtesans. At the center of the room is a stand, often with a small disc balanced on top. The goal is to take the dregs from your wine cup, the thick, unfiltered sediment at the bottom, and fling it with a flick of the wrist to knock the disc off. It's a game of skill that rapidly devolves into a messy, chaotic spectacle. Wine dregs fly everywhere, spattering the walls, the floor, and of course, the hired women. A thick, Gritty drop of red wine sludge hits Lyra's cheek. She doesn't wipe it away immediately. That would show annoyance. She lets it sit there for a moment before dabbing at it with a practiced, delicate motion, perhaps offering a witty remark about the thrower's aim. "Your aim is as true as a politician's promise, Glaucon," she might say, earning a round of appreciative, drunken laughter. Every second is a performance. Every gesture is calculated. While this is happening, her primary duties continue. Demetrios, her patron, requires constant attention. His cup must be kept full. He needs his back rubbed. He wants to lean his heavy, sweating head on her lap while he boasts about a recent shipping venture. She has to listen, to nod, to look interested, all while his hand is clamped firmly on her leg, his fingers occasionally digging in, a constant physical reminder of his ownership. The conversation, which may have started with business or politics, spirals downward. The jokes become cruder, the talk turns explicitly to sex, to past conquests, to the physical attributes of women. Lyra is expected to endure this, sometimes even to participate with a flirtatious, knowing smile. She is the object of the conversation, yet she must pretend to be an amused observer. It's a dizzying, dehumanizing experience. She hears her own body and the bodies of women like her discussed with the same detached connoisseurship as a piece of pottery or a good horse. The Corinthian girls are too bony, one man slurs. But the ones from Ionia, another chimes in, now they know how to move. This is the grinding part. The sustained, multi-hour performance of being a pleasing object. Her body begins to ache. A smile feels like a mask made of lead, pulling the corners of her mouth down. The lead-based makeup on her face is starting to crack and mix with a fine sheen of sweat, creating a grotesque, paste-like texture. Her head throbs in time with the relentless pulse of the aulos. And then the descent accelerates. The party reaches a point where the thin veneer of social ritual dissolves completely. This is where the true transaction begins, often right there in the andron, in full view of the other men. It's not about intimacy or passion, it's about display. Demetrios, wanting to assert his status, might decide it's time for a more explicit form of entertainment. He might pull Lyra from her seat on the floor onto the couch with him. The cline is narrow, barely wide enough for one person to recline comfortably, let alone two. The logistics are clumsy, awkward, and profoundly undignified. He is heavy, drunk, and uncoordinated. His breath is a foul mix of wine, garlic, and sourness. His hands, no longer just resting on her, are now exploring, demanding. The act itself is a brutal parody of intimacy. It's a performance for the other men in the room, who might cheer, offer crude advice, or simply watch with a detached, clinical interest. There is no privacy, no tenderness. There is only the rough wool of his tunic scratching her skin, the weight of his body crushing her, the sound of his grunting mixed with the jeers of his friends. She closes her eyes and goes somewhere else. She mentally recites lists, the names of the port towns in the Aegean, the ingredients for a fish stew, anything to create a distance between her mind and what is happening to her body. She focuses on the anatomical details to make it mechanical, not personal. The pressure of his knee against her hip bone, the way his sweat drips onto her carefully painted face, smearing the kohl around her eyes. The sound of the cheap bronze rings on his fingers scraping against the wooden frame of the couch. This is the slog. It's not a moment of sharp violence, but a prolonged period of submission. It's the sheer, soul-crushing duration of it all. He might be quick, or he might be frustratingly, incompetently slow. Either way, her role is to endure and to perform. She must make the sounds he wants to hear, move the way he wants her to move. Her pleasure is not only irrelevant, it's not even a consideration. Her feigned pleasure, however, is mandatory. It is part of the service he has paid for. It validates his prowess in front of his peers. So she moans. It's a dry, hollow sound from the back of her throat, a perfect imitation of a passion she does not feel. It is perhaps the most profound and exhausting acting she will do all night. And it might not end with just him. Sometimes the spirit of the symposium is one of sharing. A friend might borrow her for a few minutes. The transaction is between the men. "Demetrios, you old fox, let me have a go. I'll buy your next amphora of wine." She is a bargaining chip, a piece of communal property. The transition from one man to the next is seamless and silent. No one asks her. Her consent is assumed. The chaos is not just sexual. It's a full-body assault. A man vomits onto the floor near her. Another, trying to play courtesan, misses the target and flings wine sludge into her hair, matting the intricate braids. The night wears on, a blur of groping hands, slurred words, and the constant throbbing pressure to be accommodating, to be charming, to be nothing at all. This is the heart of her work, not the witty conversation, not the poetry. This grinding, humiliating public commodification of her body and soul. Every party
for
has
Lyra,
to end. The end of the symposium is rarely a gentle fade to black. It's more often a crash landing, a moment where the carefully managed chaos of the evening tips over into failure, humiliation, or anticlimax. The downfall is inevitable, baked into the very structure of the night. It's where the last vestiges of glamour are stripped away, leaving only the raw, undignified truth. The most common form of downfall is simply the brutal economics of the situation. The night is over. Demetrios, her patron, is either passed out in a puddle of his own drool or just coherent enough to dismiss her. This is the moment of payment, the most perilous negotiation of her life. There's no contract, no invoice. There is only his drunken whim. He might be feeling generous and toss a few silver drachmas her way, a good night's work. Or he might be feeling cheap. The wine was off tonight, he might slur, trying to justify a lower price. You weren't as lively as you usually are. He might haggle, forcing her into the humiliating position of defending her own performance, of quantifying her worth after a night of degradation. "But I recited the Sappho you love," she might have to say, her voice steady while her stomach churns. "And I pleased your friend Glaucon." Arguing is risky. Pushing too hard could mean getting nothing at all, or worse, being barred from future parties. More often than not, she accepts whatever he offers, a sum that feels pitifully small compared to the cost to her body and spirit. She gathers the coins, a cold, heavy weight in her hand, the physical proof of her own sale. Sometimes the downfall is more spectacular. Drunkenness, testosterone, and a sense of entitlement are a volatile mix. An argument can erupt between two patrons over a business deal, a political slight, or something as trivial as a game of courtesans. The argument escalates. Voices are raised, couches are overturned. In a flash, the party turns into a brawl. Lyra, caught in the middle, has to make herself small, to press herself against a wall and pray she isn't hit by a stray fist or a thrown wine cup. She is collateral damage, an insignificant bystander to the violent drama of powerful men. In these moments, her own safety is an afterthought to everyone but her. The patrons are too consumed by their own rage, and her well-being is not a factor in their calculations. She might escape with nothing more than a bad scare, or she might get a bruise, a split lip, a torn tunic. Injuries she will have to hide or explain at her next booking. Another more intimate form of failure is performance-related, his, not hers. A patron, full of wine and bravado, might find himself unable to perform the act he has paid for. This is a moment of supreme danger for Lyra. It is never his fault. It is always, somehow, hers. Was she not beautiful enough? Not seductive enough? His embarrassment, his shame, quickly curdles into anger, and that anger needs a target. He might lash out, accusing her of being frigid, of being unskilled. "You're a cold fish," he might hiss, his voice low and vicious. "I've had better from the cheapest brothels on the Piraeus." This is a profound humiliation for her, not because she cares about his pleasure, but because his failure directly impacts her earnings and her reputation. A dissatisfied customer is a dangerous thing. He might not pay. He might spread word that she is no good, poisoning the well of potential clients. She has to manage his fragile ego, to soothe him, to take the blame. "It is the wine, my lord," she might murmur. It dulls the senses of even the strongest of men. Perhaps another time. She has to absorb his shame and transform it into a no-fault situation, all while her own safety hangs in the balance. Then there is the biological downfall. The body is not a perfect machine. The wine, the rich food, the stress, it can all lead to undignified ends. A patron might vomit on her. It happens. It's disgusting, humiliating, and she has to react with a kind of maternal calm, helping him clean up, pretending it's a minor inconvenience when every fiber of her being wants to scream. Or perhaps she is the one who gets sick. The cheap wine, the stress, the physical exertion, it can all be too much. But she can't show weakness. To vomit, to faint, to show any sign of physical distress is to be unprofessional. It's to break the illusion. She has to choke it down, to fight the nausea, to maintain her composure until she can escape the room and collapse in private. The most anticlimactic downfall is simply being forgotten. The party winds down. The men, one by one, stumble off to their own chambers or are carried home by their slaves. Demetrios might simply pass out on his couch, snoring loudly, having completely forgotten her existence. She is left in the wreckage of the party, the cold, smoky room, the overturned cups, the sticky floor. She has to decide what to do. Does she try to wake him to ask for payment, risking his groggy anger? Or does she slip away silently, cutting her losses and writing the entire night off as a complete waste? More often than not, she chooses the latter. It's safer. She creeps out of the room, a ghost, leaving the scene of a battle, with nothing to show for her hours of work but a smeared face, a sore body, and the bitter taste of exploitation. This is the sordid reality that the heroic paintings and philosophical texts leave out. It doesn't end with a witty farewell. It ends with a brawl, a negotiation, a failure of anatomy, or simply being left behind in the trash. It's a pathetic, undignified conclusion to a pathetic, undignified evening. In this relentless cycle of submission and exploitation, it would be easy to see someone like Lyra as a pure victim, a passive object with no will of her own. But that's too simple. The human spirit, even when cornered and commodified, finds ways to fight back. These are not grand rebellions. They are not heroic escapes. They are small, subtle, often futile acts of defiance, tiny sparks of agency in an overwhelming darkness. These moments of resistance are what make her survival not just a physical fact, but a psychological victory of sorts. The most common form of resistance is economic. The transaction is inherently unfair, so she finds ways to rebalance the books. While her patron, Demetrios, is passed out drunk, she might deftly lift a few extra coins from the pouch he left on the table. It's a huge risk. If caught, she could be beaten or sold. But the reward, a little extra food, a bit of security, is often worth it. It's not just about the money. It's a quiet act of revenge, a reclaiming of value. He bought her body for a pittance. She's taking back a fraction of what she's truly owed. Or perhaps her resistance is in the quality of her service. For a client she despises, like Philippos with his pinching hands and sour breath, she can deploy a whole arsenal of subtle sabotage. She can play the aulos just slightly off-key, enough to be irritating but not enough to be an open insult. She can be slow to refill his wine cup. During conversation, she can give him flat, uninspired responses, forcing him to carry the conversational weight. When the physical act is demanded, she can be a cold fish, making the experience as unpleasurable as possible for him without technically refusing. She can give him exactly what he paid for and not an ounce more of feigned enthusiasm. It's a way of saying, you can buy my time, but you cannot buy my effort. You cannot buy my spirit. These small acts give her a sliver of control, a way to punish the cruel and reward the relatively kind. Another powerful form of resistance is camaraderie. In the moments away from the male gaze, in the market, at the public fountain, or in the quiet moments before a symposium, the hetairai and other working women share a dark, cynical bond. They exchange information. Avoid the senator from Thebes, his hands wander too freely even for our trade. Demetrios the merchant is generous if you flatter his dreadful poetry. They share remedies for bruises, for morning sickness. They share a language of grim humor, of gallows jokes that only they can understand. This network is a vital support system. It's a way of pooling knowledge to navigate the treacherous landscape of their profession. A shared, knowing glance across a noisy andron between Lyra and the flute girl is a silent conversation. It says, I see you, I know what this costs, we are in this together. This solidarity is a quiet rebellion against the system that seeks to isolate them and pit them against each other for the attention of powerful men. Then there is the fantasy of the grand escape. Every hetaira has probably dreamed of it, saving up enough money to buy her freedom, if she's a slave, or to retire to a small farm in the countryside, away from the city, the men, the filth. Narratives of these escape attempts would have been cautionary tales. A woman saves for years, only to have her pimp discover her stash and take it all. Or she buys her freedom, but with no skills other than the ones she learned in the trade, and no legal standing, she quickly falls into poverty and is forced back into the life just to survive. Or she falls in love with a client who promises to set her up in her own house, only to be abandoned when he marries a respectable citizen's daughter. The escape attempt, even when it fails, is a crucial act of resistance because it is an act of hope. It's the refusal to accept that this is all her life will ever be. The failure of that hope is what makes her eventual resignation so tragic. It's a resignation born not of apathy but of a brutal education in the way the world truly works. The most intimate form of resistance happens within the fortress of her own mind. The silent, vicious insult she hurls at her clients in her head. The cataloguing of their flaws, their hypocrisies, their pathetic insecurities. This internal monologue is her sacred space. While her body is being used, her mind is busy composing a savage, unwritten satire of the entire affair. This mental rebellion is undetectable and therefore unstoppable. It's how she preserves her sense of self, her sense of superiority over the fools who think they own her. There are also moments where the professional mask slips. A client goes too far, a touch is too brutal, an insult too sharp, and a flicker of genuine emotion breaks through. A flash of pure hatred in her eyes, a tightening of her jaw, a voice that is suddenly cold and sharp instead of warm and inviting. These moments are dangerous. They risk shattering the fantasy and provoking a violent response, but they are also necessary. They are the moments the real Lyra claws her way to the surface, reminding herself, and sometimes the client, that there is a real person underneath the layers of lead paint and practiced smiles. These small acts of defiance, these failed escapes and secret rebellions are the texture of her life. They are what prevent her story from being a simple, flat narrative of victimhood. They show a woman constantly, cleverly and bravely fighting a war she knows she cannot win, but refusing to surrender completely. You'd think a night of public sex, emotional labor, and dodging flying wine dregs would be bad enough. But history, like a cruel dungeon master, always has another monster waiting behind the next door. Just when the grinding chaos of the symposium has settled into a predictable, albeit miserable rhythm, a wildcard element is introduced. Something that escalates the weirdness, the danger, or the sheer humiliation of the evening, pushing Lyra to the very edge of her endurance. Imagine the scene. Demetrios is drunkenly pouring at Lyra. The flute girl is playing a hypnotic, repetitive tune. The air is thick and smells like a brewery floor. Suddenly the curtain to the andron is thrown open with a dramatic flourish. Standing there is not another drunken guest, but a woman. She is older, severe, and draped in the dark, modest robes of a respectable citizen wife. It is Demetrios's wife, Ione. Silence falls over the room. The flute girl's music trails off into a pathetic squeak. The men freeze, their wine cups halfway to their lips. This is a catastrophic breach of protocol. The andron is the man's world, the gynecium, the woman's. The two are not supposed to intersect, especially not like this. Ione's eyes, cold and filled with a righteous fury, sweep the room and land on Lyra, who is still half-sprawled on the couch under her husband. The look she gives Lyra isn't one of female solidarity. It's one of pure, unadulterated loathing. To Ione, Lyra is not another woman trapped in a patriarchal system. She is the home-wrecker, the seductive foreign filth who has tainted her husband and her home with her whorish presence. Demetrios scrambles to his feet, sputtering, trying to regain some semblance of authority. "Ione, what is the meaning of this? You shame me before my guests." But his wife is not deterred. She has likely endured years of this, and tonight something has snapped. Her anger is not just for her husband, it's for the whole system that allows him this freedom while she is locked away. But she cannot scream at the system, so she screams at Lyra. "Get this creature out of my house!" she shrieks, her voice cracking with a pain that is almost as terrifying as her anger. "This harlot, smelling of cheap perfume and sin! Get her out!" Now Lyra is in an impossible position. She is the target of a wife's fury and a husband's shame. Demetrios, desperate to save face in front of his friends, will not defend her. He will sacrifice her in a heartbeat. He shoves her off the couch. "Get out! Go on! Get out!" he barks at her, as if her presence were all her own idea. She has to gather her dignity, what's left of it, and flee the room under the contemptuous glares of the men and the triumphant, hateful stare of the wife. She won't be paid. She will be lucky to escape without being struck by either husband or wife. The wild card has completely upended the power dynamic. A new, more powerful authority figure has entered the scene, and Lyra is crushed between them. Another kind of wild card might be the arrival of a rival. Let's say Lyra is the favored hetaira of Demetrios. Halfway through the night, another patron arrives, a wealthier and more powerful politician named Critias, and with him is a new girl, younger, fresher, perhaps with a novel talent, like juggling or reciting bawdy Lydian poetry. Suddenly, Lyra is old news. The attention of the room, and more importantly, of Demetrios, shifts to the new arrival. She is forced to watch as her patron, who was just moments ago whispering promises in her ear, now fawns over the new girl. The cruelty is not just in being replaced, it's in the public nature of the spectacle. She has to sit there, maintaining her professional smile, while her own obsolescence is played out in real time. Her market value plummets before her very eyes. This escalation isn't violent, but it's psychologically brutal. It's a stark reminder of the fundamental rule of her trade: you are only as good as your novelty. A different, and perhaps stranger escalation could be ritualistic. The symposium might coincide with a religious festival, perhaps a minor one dedicated to Dionysus, the god of wine, madness, and ecstasy. As the night wears on, the party could take a turn from a standard drunken bash into a quasi-religious frenzy. The men seeking a more profound state of intoxication might start chanting, dancing, and entering a kind of trance. They might demand that Lyra and the flute girl lead them in these Bacchic rites. Suddenly, she is not just a courtesan, she is a reluctant priestess in a cult of drunken chaos. The demands become stranger, more dangerous. They might see her as a vessel for the god, a maenad. The line between play acting and genuine, terrifying madness becomes dangerously blurred. The fear is no longer just of being groped or cheated, but of being swept up in a tide of collective hysteria that could end in serious injury or death. Or the wild card could be a sudden shift in the external world. A messenger bursts in, breathless, with news of a military defeat, a political assassination, or a sudden plague outbreak. The atmosphere of the party instantly changes from debauchery to fear and paranoia. The patrons, now sobered by terror, might turn on each other, or they might turn on the outsiders in the room. Lyra, a foreigner, a woman of low status, is an easy scapegoat. The disaster must be someone's fault, a sign of the god's displeasure. Her immoral presence could be blamed for bringing a curse upon the city. The evening transforms from a financial transaction into a fight for her life as she tries to slip away before the mob mentality solidifies against her. This wildcard element is crucial because it shatters the illusion of any predictability. It reminds Lyra and us that she is living on a razor's edge. Her tenuous control over the situation is a fantasy. At any moment, an angry wife, a new competitor, a religious fervor, or a political disaster can detonate her world. The escalation is the moment the script is thrown out and pure, terrifying improvisation begins. The chaos eventually subsides. The wild card has played its hand, the brawlers have passed out, or the party has simply fizzled into a slurry of snores and stale air. The main event is over. But the night's work is not done. Now comes the aftermath, the quiet, grotesque landscape left behind. This is the part of the story that is never depicted on the vases, the hollow, exhausted epilogue to the Bacchanal. Lyra slips away from the patron's house, unpaid and humiliated after the wife's tirade, or she stumbles out after finally being dismissed, a few cold coins clutched in her fist. The walk home through the pre-dawn streets of Athens is a journey through a different world. The city is quiet, save for the crowing of the first roosters and the distant barking of dogs. The air is cool and damp, and it feels good on her hot, flushed skin. This is the first moment of peace she's had in hours, but it's a peace saturated with exhaustion and disgust. She arrives back at her small, rented room. The space that felt like a prison in the morning now feels like a sanctuary, however meager. The first thing she does is bar the door. The simple act of sliding a wooden beam into place is a profound relief. For a few hours at least, she is safe from the hands and eyes of men. The room is dark and smells of stale air and her own lingering perfume, a scent she has come to hate. She lights a single, sputtering oil lamp, and the small flame casts huge, wavering shadows on the walls. In the dim light, she confronts the wreckage of herself. She catches her reflection in the polished bronze mirror. The face that stares back is a horror show. The perfect pale mask of lead ceruse is cracked and smeared. The kohl around her eyes has mixed with sweat and maybe a few unshed tears, creating dark, raccoon-like circles. A smudge of red from her lips is smeared across her cheek. A bit of dried wine sludge is still matted in her hair. She looks like a clown after a tragedy. The first order of business is triage. She unpins her heavy, elaborate hairdo, letting the braids tumble down, a massive relief for her aching scalp. She peels off her tunic, which is stained with wine, sweat, and who knows what else. It reeks. Her body underneath is a roadmap of the night's work. There might be a fresh bruise blooming on her arm from a careless grip, a scrape on her knee from the floor, a general soreness in her muscles from being held in awkward positions. She is a collection of small pains. Then comes the cleanup, a ritual of stripping away the night. She pours cold water from a jug into a clay basin. The water is a shock, but a welcome one. She begins to scrub her face, trying to get the lead paint off. It's a thick, greasy substance, and it takes harsh soap and vigorous rubbing to remove. She can feel it coming away in patches, revealing the real, tired skin underneath. She scrubs until her face is raw and red, but clean. Freeing herself from the poison mask is a small, vital act of reclaiming her own face. She washes the rest of her body, the cold water doing little to soothe the aches, but at least removing the filth and the feel of other people's sweat. This is also the time for the grim internal cleanup, the practical, terrifying biology of her work. She retrieves the sea sponge soaked in vinegar that she may have used as a contraceptive. She cleans it, her hands moving with a mechanical, detached efficiency. Every month, this ritual is a gamble, a prayer to the cold gods of biology. She assesses the damage. Does she have enough money for food for the next few days? Was the client important enough that his dissatisfaction will cause her problems? Is the bruise on her arm something she can cover with a sleeve, or will it affect her work? It's a cold, hard accounting of her losses. If she has a slave girl, the girl would be there, silently helping her. Heating water if they have the fuel, cleaning the soiled tunic, tending to her bruises with a cool cloth. This relationship is its own complex power dynamic. The slave is even lower on the social ladder than Lyra, and yet, in these quiet moments, she is a confidant, a nurse, a silent witness. There is a bond of shared female experience in a brutal male world, but it is a bond forged in mutual powerlessness. The final part of the aftermath is the silence. The raucous noise of the symposium is replaced by an overwhelming quiet, broken only by the sound of her own breathing. In this silence, the emotional toll of the night begins to creep in. The humiliation, the fear, the bone-deep weariness. There is no one to talk to, no one to comfort her. She is utterly alone with the residue of the transaction. She might pour herself a cup of wine, not the watered-down party fuel, but a stronger, undiluted dose, a medicine, an anesthetic to numb the buzzing in her mind and help her find a few hours of dreamless black sleep. Or she might just crawl onto her lumpy mattress, pull a rough woolen blanket over her sore body, and stare into the darkness. The main event is over, but the work has left its stain on everything. The quiet landscape of the aftermath is where the true cost is tallied, not in coins, but in silent, invisible wounds. Sleep, when it finally comes, is not a respite. It's a shallow, troubled state, and the dawn arrives too quickly, bringing with it the morning after clarity that is its own form of torture. The physical soreness is a dull, constant reminder of the previous night, but the deeper wounds are the psychological ones. The lingering trauma of her profession is not a dramatic, single event. It's a slow-acting poison like the lead in her makeup, gradually seeping into her soul and hardening it into something unrecognizable. The primary coping mechanism is numbness. To survive, Sira has to cultivate a profound sense of detachment. She learns to erect a thick wall between her physical self, the body that is rented and used, and her inner self. This isn't a conscious decision every night, it becomes a permanent state of being. She develops what might be called a professional personality, the charming, witty, accommodating Hetaira. This persona is a shield, but it's also a cage. Over time, the line between the performance and the real person begins to blur. Does she even remember what it feels like to have a genuine, uncalculated emotion? A real laugh? A spontaneous smile? She watches herself go through the motions of her life, as if from a great distance. This emotional numbness is a vital survival tool, but it comes at a terrible price. It isolates her completely. She can't form genuine connections because intimacy is the very thing that has been weaponized against her. To let someone in, to be vulnerable, is to risk a pain far greater than any physical bruise. So she keeps everyone out, clients, other women, even herself. Her relationships are transactional, her friendships guarded and based on mutual utility. Love is a dangerous foreign concept, a weakness she cannot afford. Another key coping mechanism is a deep, abiding cynicism. She has seen the great men of Athens, the politicians, the generals, the philosophers, at their most pathetic and depraved. She has heard their lofty speeches about justice and virtue, and then she has wiped their vomit off her tunic. This exposure to their hypocrisy inoculates her against any form of idealism. She believes in nothing and no one. The gods are a joke, politics is a game for rich fools, and love is a story told to children. Her worldview is stripped down to the brutal basics of power and money. This cynicism is a source of dark humor. In the company of other hetairae, the jokes are savage. They mock their clients' physical shortcomings, their intellectual pretensions, their moral failings. This humor is a release valve, a way of turning their daily humiliations into a source of shared, bitter laughter. It's a way of saying, they might have power over our bodies, but we have the power of seeing them for the pathetic creatures they truly are. This humor is a form of resistance, but it's also corrosive. It eats away at any capacity for joy or wonder, leaving only a bleak, knowing smirk. The trauma also manifests in her relationship with her own body. Her body is her tool, her asset, and her enemy. She is forced into a state of hyper-awareness of its functions and its betrayals. Every new wrinkle, every pound gained, every sign of aging is a source of sheer terror. It signals a decline in her market value, a step closer to the poverty and destitution of the street-walking pawn. This creates a constant, low-grade anxiety. She scrutinizes her reflection in the bronze mirror not with vanity, but with the critical eye of a merchant inspecting his goods for flaws. She pokes and prods at her flesh, cataloguing its imperfections. This self-objectification is a tragedy. She has so internalized the gaze of her clients that she now looks at herself through their eyes. There is also the ever-present fear of violence, fear of disease, fear of pregnancy, fear of being cheated, fear of being abandoned. This fear is a constant low hum beneath the surface of her daily life. It's the reason she can't sleep soundly, the reason her stomach is always in a knot. To cope, she might turn to self-medication. The wine is not just for parties. A cup in the morning to dull the anxiety, a cup in the evening to force herself to sleep. Or she might seek out other pharmaca, drugs or herbal concoctions that promise escape or oblivion. Opium, known to the Greeks, could offer a temporary, hazy retreat from the sharp edges of her reality. This path offers relief, but it's a quick road to ruin, another way her profession consumes her from the inside out. The psychological scars are the ones that last. The bruises fade, the soreness subsides, but the memory of 1,000 small humiliations accretes in her mind, forming a heavy, immovable weight. It's the memory of being called a cold fish by an impotent man, the memory of being publicly shamed by a client's wife, the memory of having to smile while being groped by a man whose hands are dirty. These memories are the ghosts that haunt her quiet room. They are the price of survival, the lingering trauma that ensures that even when she is alone, she is never truly free. The nightly drama of the symposium isn't just a series of private transactions happening in a vacuum. It's a vital, if sordid, cog in the machinery of the entire Athenian polis. The widespread organized system of sexual commerce, from the high-class hetaira down to the cheapest brothel worker, had profound and deeply intertwined effects on the city's health, economy, and social structure. Zooming out from Lyra's personal trauma reveals a society propped up by its own hypocrisy. The most immediate and devastating ripple effect was on public health. While the Greeks didn't have our understanding of sexually transmitted diseases, They were acutely aware that certain sicknesses were linked to sexual contact. They didn't know about bacteria or viruses, but they knew about the weeping sores, the painful urination, the rashes, and the eventual madness and decay that followed a life of promiscuity. They might have attributed it to miasma, or divine punishment, but the empirical evidence was all around them. The cures were often worse than the disease. Quack doctors and traveling charlatans peddled all sorts of useless or dangerous remedies. The most infamous was mercury. A man suffering from the sores of what was likely syphilis or gonorrhea might be prescribed mercury ointments or even ingestible mercury compounds. The mercury would cause profuse salivation and sweating, which was misinterpreted as the body expelling the disease's poison. In reality, it was just mercury poisoning, which would lead to tooth loss, neurological damage, and a slow, agonizing death. Women like Lyra were seen as vectors of this disease, polluted vessels of sickness. It was another way to blame them for the consequences of the men's own behavior. A man would frequent brothels, contract a disease, and then blame the unclean women he visited, not his own choices. This created a cycle of disease and blame that flowed through the city, from the brothels to the homes, as men would bring these sicknesses back to their wives, who had no power to refuse them. Economically, prostitution was a massive industry. It wasn't a fringe activity, it was a central pillar of the Athenian economy. Brothels, porneia, were businesses owned by pornoboskoi, who often became quite wealthy. They paid taxes, which meant the city itself was profiting directly from the sale of human bodies. The state, while publicly espousing virtue, had a vested financial interest in the continuation of the sex trade. This created a bizarre legal and economic framework. Laws were created not to abolish prostitution, but to regulate and tax it. A registered prostitute had a certain, albeit minimal, legal status, but it was the status of a taxable good, not a person. The money earned in this trade flowed upwards. Lyra's meager earnings would go to her landlord, to the merchant who sold her makeup, to the wine seller. The pimp's profits would be spent on property and luxury goods. The taxes would fund public works. The entire city was, in a very real sense, built on the backs of thousands of women like her. This economic dependency created a powerful incentive to maintain the status quo. Reformers who spoke out against the moral decay were fighting an uphill battle against an entrenched economic system. The societal structure itself was predicated on this sexual stratification. The purpose of the Athenian citizen wife was to be a domestic manager and, most importantly, a breeder of legitimate citizen sons. Her sexuality was tightly controlled to ensure the purity of the bloodline. To protect these respectable wives from the unbridled lust of their husbands, society needed an outlet. That outlet was women like Lyra, the hetaira, the concubine, the brothel worker. They were the designated release valves for male sexual desire, allowing the ideal of the chaste, secluded wife to exist. It was a system built on a profound Madonna-whore complex, writ large across an entire culture. The men of Athens divided women into two categories, the ones they married and the ones they used, and they convinced themselves this was a natural, even virtuous arrangement. The most tragic ripple effect was, of course, the next generation. What happened to the children born from these encounters? A child born to a non-citizen mother, like a hetaira, could never be a citizen. They were born into a legal and social limbo. If the mother couldn't afford to keep the child, a grim fate awaited. Unwanted infants were often abandoned, left on a hillside or in a public place to die of exposure or to be picked up by slave traders. This practice, known as infant exposure, was a common and accepted, if tragic, part of life. The child of a prostitute was born with a stigma that was impossible to escape. They were outcasts, forever marked by the circumstances of their birth. If they survived, they were likely to be absorbed back into the very system that created them. The boys as laborers or slaves, the girls raised to become prostitutes themselves. The cycle of exploitation was self-perpetuating. The societal ripple effect shows that Lyra's story is not just her own. It's the story of a system designed to channel male power, protect property and lineage, and generate wealth, all at the expense of an entire class of women and their children. The public health crises, the economic dependency, and the brutal social stratification were not bugs in the system. They were features. They were the logical, ugly consequences of a society that decided some human beings were simply worth less than others. As the centuries pass, the raw, bleeding reality of Lyra's life begins to scab over. The grime is washed away, the screams are silenced, and the stench of desperation is replaced by the sterile perfume of history. The final, most bitter legacy of the hetaira is not her suffering, but the way that suffering was systematically erased and rewritten into a romantic, palatable myth. The men who wrote the history were, by and large, the same men who used her, or men of their class. They were the philosophers, the playwrights, the historians. And when they wrote about the hetaira, they did not record the brutal economics, the nightly humiliations, or the poisonous makeup. They engaged in a collective act of historical laundering. The process begins with art. Look at the figures on Greek vases. The hetairae at the symposia are depicted as graceful, beautiful, willing participants in the festivities. They recline elegantly, play their instruments with serene expressions, and gaze lovingly at their patrons. There is no hint of coercion, no sign of the exhaustion or disgust that Lyra felt. The vase painter, like the modern-day Instagram filter, smooths out all the ugly realities. He creates an idealized image, a fantasy of perfect, harmonious pleasure. The violence, the vomiting, the haggling over payment, these details are conveniently left outside the frame. The sculptures of famous courtesans like Phryne, who famously bared her breasts in court to win an acquittal for impiety, depict a woman of divine beauty, a living incarnation of Aphrodite. The statue doesn't show the terror she must have felt on trial for her life. It shows a triumphant, idealized female form. The art transforms a desperate act of survival into a moment of aesthetic glory. Then comes the literature. The writers of the time, when they mentioned hetairae, often did so in one of two ways. They were either used as symbols of dangerous, seductive femininity that could lead good men astray, the siren archetype, or they were elevated into the mythical role of the intellectual muse. The latter is the more insidious lie. The story of Aspasia of Miletus, the partner of the great statesman Pericles, becomes the template. History remembers her as a brilliant intellectual whose salon was a gathering place for the greatest minds of Athens, including Socrates himself. While she was undoubtedly intelligent and influential, this narrative conveniently glosses over the fact that she was also relentlessly slandered in public as a brothel keeper and a corrupting influence. Her enemies called her a whore. Her admirers turned her into a goddess of the mind. Neither narrative likely captured the complex, precarious reality of her life. By focusing on the one-in-a-million exception like Aspasia, history effectively erases the thousands of anonymous Lyras. It creates the illusion that being a hetaira was a viable career path for an intelligent woman, a way to participate in the intellectual life of the city. It was not. It was a dangerous trade, and Aspasia's success was a historical anomaly, not the norm. The story gets further sanitized with the passage of time. Roman authors, looking back at the golden age of Greece, amplified the myth. Later, during the Renaissance and the 18th and 19th centuries, European artists and writers, fascinated by the classical world, latched onto the figure of the courtesan. They painted lush, romantic canvases of Phryne and Aspasia, projecting their own era's fantasies about the noble prostitute onto the ancient world. The hetaira became a symbol of erotic freedom and intellectual partnership, a stark contrast to the stuffy, restrictive mores of their own time. The myth was just so much more appealing than the truth. The truth is that Lyra was a survivor of a brutal system. The myth is that she was a cherished artist and lover. The truth is that her body was a site of commerce and trauma. The myth is that her body was a source of inspiration and pleasure. The truth is that her mind was a fortress of cynical survival instincts. The myth is that her mind was a playground for philosophers. This rewriting of history serves a profound psychological purpose. It allows us to look back at a foundational culture of Western civilization without confronting its ugly underpinnings. It allows us to admire the philosophy of Plato, the architecture of the Parthenon, and the drama of Sophocles, without acknowledging that this entire cultural edifice was built on a foundation of slavery and the systemic exploitation of women. The sanitized legacy of the hetera is a testament to the power of narrative. History is not just what happened. It's the story we choose to tell about what happened, and the story we have chosen to tell about the Greek courtesan is a beautiful, comforting, and deeply dishonest one. It's the final insult. After a life of being used, she is used one last time by history itself, her reality contorted to serve our need for a less troubling past. So we've dragged ourselves through the filth and the fury of a single night in ancient Athens. We've seen the painful construction of a false ideal, the chaotic degradation of the symposium, and the quiet, lonely horror of the aftermath. We've watched as history, with its filthy, ink-stained hands, scrubbed the story clean, turning our traumatized survivor, Lyra, into a romantic caricature, the witty, empowered muse who inspired great men. It's a nice story, isn't it? It's a lie that lets us admire the marble columns without thinking about the mud and blood that held them up. It's the final bleak punchline. The brutal reality of sexual exploitation was so thoroughly and effectively laundered that it became an aspirational fantasy. But here's the real kicker, the part that should make you shift uncomfortably on your modern, comfortable couch. Are you so sure we've changed? We've swapped the lead-based makeup for foundation with SPF and the bronze coins for digital transfers, but the fundamental transaction feels hauntingly familiar. We've just gotten better at dressing it up. Think about the modern sugar baby crafting a perfect online persona, a curated gallery of youth and availability, performing emotional intimacy and companionship for financial support from a wealthy, powerful daddy. She's expected to be beautiful, witty, and unbothered by the power imbalance. She's selling the fantasy of the perfect, no-strings-attached girlfriend. Is her carefully managed Instagram profile really so different from Lyra's carefully painted face? Isn't she also gambling on her youth and beauty in a market with a brutal expiration date? Or zoom out further. Look at the gig economy, the illusion of being your own boss, the freedom of freelancing, while in reality you are utterly beholden to the whims of an algorithm, to customer ratings, to a system that demands you perform endless, emotional labor for shrinking wages with zero security. You are selling pieces of your time, your energy, your vehicle, your very self, all while being told that you are an empowered entrepreneur. It's the same old deal, just with a better user interface. We commodify ourselves and each other constantly in ways both subtle and overt. We build personal brands, sell our personalities for clicks and likes, and engage in transactional relationships disguised as connections. We consume other people's lives as entertainment, demanding they perform authenticity for our amusement, and discard them just as quickly when the next, newer, more interesting thing comes along. The system that used Lyra was built on the clear, stark belief that some people were tools for the pleasure and convenience of others. We tell ourselves we've moved past that. We tell ourselves we believe in equality and human dignity. But have we really? Or have we just gotten better at hiding the price tags? The legacy of the hetera isn't just some dusty, ancient history. It's a mirror. And when you look into it, you might just see a flicker of your own reflection. So here's the final provocative question I'll leave you with as you turn off the light and try to sleep. How much of your own life is a performance for someone else's benefit? And what parts of your own humanity are you selling piece by piece just to survive?